Caleb, I hope I'm allowed to share my screen.
Why not? Why not?
Okay. So, we are um, we are going to quickly go through the general format of putting together a paper. I put this document on the page this morning. Someone sent to me some time ago, so I was going through my email when I saw it. So I thought it's good we take a look at it. So one thing I've come to realize about publication is that one of the most important parts of a paper is the introductory part. And how you write it will determine whether your paper will be desk rejected or it will proceed for review. Because my little experience has been that the editors have a lot to do. They have quite a lot to do. And so when papers come, they mostly do not have the time to read the entire thing. So what they are looking out for is mostly to read your abstract just to get the results and then the general view of what you found. But sometimes they will take a little time to go through your introduction. And mostly when I pick a paper, I know that the first chapter is generally the background of the paper, of the work. And from the background, then we start building the argument. That is, try coming out with the issues of the gaps and then how the paper actually fills that gap. And then afterwards, the contribution is actually made clear. And then the last aspect talks about the structure of the thesis. The paper. Actually, this general aspect of form of writing the introduction, when you read journal of papers from Journal of Operations Management, you tend to have a different view about how introduction is actually written. Or mostly when I read their papers, it looks like they have a different way of writing, and it's always interesting. But for now, I think we should go with the general one, and maybe with time we can all build ourselves to write like how the Journal of Operations Management they write their introduction. Recently, I think there was this uh, seminar by Kariska. We're giving some papers to read, and one of the papers was actually from Journal of Operations Management. I was actually fascinated by the way the introduction was written. But generally, with the papers we are going to extract, the few things I've seen with student papers is that you may not be, it may just be a guide, but we may have to do some additional work, especially with the introduction. Please, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you, boss.
All right, thank you. So with the student papers, with the few papers I have seen, the introduction may not all be there. We expect that with the thesis, they have the background where they give a general perspective of the work, and then they go to the problem statement. And mostly, the way most of them write the problem statements, they write them in a general form. They don't write them in terms of literature where we are trying to come out with the gap. But mostly, the background should have done the general motivation of the work, as in the actual practical issues that are there, and that is actually warranting the study. So the problem statement should have focused largely on the gaps but mostly you don't see that. Some of them, you don't even see any serious gaps. And then right after that, they go into the justification. And the justification should be they go into the research questions and objectives. Those ones, yes, we'll definitely pick those ones. But when it comes to the justification, where we can pick the contribution, they are unable to actually structure them in the form that a paper would have attract a paper to actually consider our work. So the introduction aspect, we may have to do a little extra. So what are those things we are trying to look at? So we go through this short article that was written by Keith, and then see what they expect in an introduction, and then based on that we would move on from there. I'm so much concerned about the introduction because it's actually, somebody will say, is the most important aspect of the paper because it consolidates almost everything the paper does. So you've all heard about the hook of the paper. Attract the reader's interest by telling them what this paper relates to, something interesting. What makes a topic interesting? Some combination of the following attributes makes why something worth looking at. So the hook generally deals with the background, the motivation. Why is this particular thing even important to us? So for instance, I worked on supply chain financing. Why is supply chain financing so much important to us? So in my background, I'm looking at issues of disruptions. I'm looking at how the world is changing, how disruptions are making businesses very making business very difficult to operate. And things like that, you are trying to get whoever is reading to be more concerned, you're trying to hook the interest of the person. So mostly you have to motivate your work with something that is current, something that anybody looking at, maybe it could be something topical in the media or anything that is related to your work. So that becomes the hook. So they give an example of why matters. When why rises or falls, people are hurt or helped. Why is puzzling? It defies easy explanation. Why is controversial? Some argue one thing while others say another thing. Why is big, like the service sector, or common, like traffic jams? So it means that now, generally, when I start building my background from that perspective, I give the general issues of the importance of some the issues that make supply chain finance very important. And I move from there to talk about why should this work even be concerned, like why should we be concerned about supply chain financing? So it's more of problematization. So first of all, you give the general background, the general motivation of the study. So mostly I'll ask you, and so what? So the practical issues that the work is really related to. Now, when there is a practical issue, there are issues of disruptions. There are a lot of studies that would have studied on these disruptions you are talking about, or whatever you are trying to motivate your work with. There are other studies that have worked on these disruptions and all that. So after the general background, you are now trying to come into the problem statement itself, the gaps itself. So even though these disruptions and all that has been looked at, however, the use of supply chain financing as a risk mitigating tool in terms of maybe disruption is something that the literature still lacks. So apart after the general issues I have raised, I then go into my specific research gaps. I'm still building the hook to talk about what hasn't actually been done. What my work, like what are the gaps within the general literature? Even if some works have been done within supply chain finance, we did some work recently that looks at business model innovation as an outcome of supply chain financing. So, and this is the first study I have seen using that, looking at business model innovation as an outcome of supply chain financing. So in building such a gap, I talk about the fact that yes, as much as supply chain financing has attracted a lot of attention from academia, most of them relate supply chain financing to performance in terms of financial, organizational, and supply chain performance and effectiveness. Then the notion that supply chain financing can relate to or influence business model innovation is something that is still under-researched within the supply chain literature. So generally, I've spoken about the supply chain issues and that in terms of the disruptions, in terms of how important it is and how it is important in actually disruptions. And I move on into the actual literature and talk about the fact that yes, supply chain finance helps during disruptions, but most studies have looked at it mainly as a performance issue. But in disruptions, one thing that is actually needed during disruptions is businesses to be able to innovate. So we want to see how supply chain financing can actually help businesses to actually, innovate Please, are you get? Hello? Hello?
Yeah,
Hello.
it looks like
Yeah.
your line breaks.
It's been on and off, sure.
Okay, sorry. So yes, so I was talking about trying to build a gap by using supply chain financing and then business model innovation. And it's an obvious fact that within supply chain finance, mostly hardly do you see an outcome variable being business model innovation. So it is actually a contribution. And I even made the contribution even better. Sorry, the gap even better by talking about the fact that we are associating supply chain financing to disruptions and then risk and issues. So risks and issues like that. So if businesses are within that kind of environment, the one thing that can actually keep them going is to be able to innovate. Even before achieving the financial performance and all these performance issues, it's about the ability to innovate. So how does supply chain financing actually help them to innovate? So we are trying to hook the reader, let them know how important the supply chain financing is and what we are actually bringing on board. What new thing are we introducing? So after the general background, that is the next aspect of the work we are trying to do. So we hook them with the general background, link that to the gaps. And then based on the gaps, we then come in with the question. So the question then is, every study must have a question. So with this example I was giving, supply chain financing and business model innovation, we are trying to look at how, under what conditions does supply chain financing influence business model innovation? So these are the questions. This is the question I'm actually looking at. So specifically, you can also talk about the individual questions within the.
Hello, Ike.
Hello.
So where then will be the objective? So is it like in terms of publication, it should be more of the research questions than the research objective?
Okay. So with publications, it's either you go with the question or you go with objective. You can't have the two because they are talking about the same thing. Generally, they are talking about the same thing. So I've seen papers that have tried to give, sometimes you're able to give a general question. So we talk about, I remember one time Kariska had a conference where we're trying to develop research questions. And sometimes you can have one general question, and then out of that question, you can have the various objectives you are looking at. But to have the questions like we normally do them in these thesis that we do, and then have objectives in that same manner, it doesn't really work for papers. So we can have a general question where we talk about the study seeks to answer the question of under what conditions does supply chain financing influence business model innovation? Then that could be it. The study answers this question by, first of all, looking at the relationship between supply chain financing and business model innovation. 2 looks at the moderating role of maybe environmental dynamism in the relationship between supply chain finance and business model innovation. So you realize that you give a general, so mostly we can look at it from the perspective of maybe the general objective that we normally write. You coin that as a question, and then you go into the specific ones as the question, the objectives, or the other way around.
Okay.
But you can also go direct straight into the issues we have, the issues you intend to do. Look
Okay.
at. That, I hope it's okay.
Sure, it's okay.
Please, do we have any other questions before I move on?
Oh, you can go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so this particular guidelines tells us that we should talk about the antecedents after the question. But most studies also would look at the antecedents as part of the roadmap. And then after the question, they would then talk about how the work contributes to this to literature. So in another way, you can also look at it from their perspective by drafting it in a way like, okay, this study contributes to the literature by observing, analyzing business model innovation as an antecedent of, as an outcome of supply chain financing, as against previous work such as maybe Ali et al. 2021, who looked at supply chain at financial performance as an outcome of supply chain financing. We talk about maybe Bona 2022, who looked at maybe supply chain effectiveness as an outcome of supply chain financing. So you are discussing the contribution, but you're also talking about other papers that you are linking them to other papers that have done some work that your work is actually building on. Your work is so much is slightly different from. So you are trying to establish the contribution that your work is actually given to the literature, that particular stream of literature we're actually talking about. So in the antecedent and in the value added, they are indirectly, you can put them together. And then, so you can do what I spoke about, like what I did in the after the hook, where I said the hook, you have the background, you have the gaps, and then you talk about the question. Then you do the antecedents and the value addition together, where you are talking about your contribution, but at the same time also relating the work, your contribution to other previous works, and saying that so and so as against papers like A, B, C, D that looked at supply chain finance, outcomes of supply chain financing as supply chain effectiveness and all that. You are looking at it as a business model, as business model innovation. You can do it that way. And then after that, the last part of the introduction should be the roadmap. But let me also caution you at the part of the antecedents and building the gap. One thing is that you look at papers and it's like, it's almost like a whole literature review on its own. And that is one thing we must avoid. We must avoid trying to review literature at that part because it will become boring. You are just pointing out what has been done, like how your work actually fills the gaps within the literature. So lastly, the last part is the roadmap. So just like the organization of the study that we normally have in our thesis, is the same thing here. You talk about the various sections that your work seeks to, your work deals with. So mostly, if you have a literature review, you talk about the next section deals with the literature review, where concepts such as supply chain financing and business model innovations are discussed. Also, the methodological approach is also discussed, where measures, sources of measures and statistical analysis used are also discussed. The fourth section deals with the discussions of the results and then the discussions. And lastly, the study is concluded in the fifth section, where limitations and future research directions are also given. So how you structure this introduction is very, very important in the paper's acceptance. So I would like us to quickly go through one of Dominic's paper and look at the introduction bit, what he tried doing, and then we'll take a cue from there, and then we'll continue with the rest of the paper, the discussions. So let me stop sharing and reshare. Please, if there are any questions at this point, I'll be happy we can discuss them. Please, can we continue?
Yeah, please
Sure.
go ahead.
So this is his paper, Linking Resource Lack to Operational Resilience, Integration of Resource-Based and Attention-Based Perspectives. All right, so he starts by building the background. Within the last several decades, a global supply chain landscape has been rocked by numerous major disruptive events that have exposed the fragility of firms' operation systems. So let's look at the topic again. Linking resource lack to operational resilience. So he's talking about resilience. So he's trying to build a background for the resilience. And mostly when you are talking about resilience, definitely you have issues of disruptions, because they're trying to build resilience because of disruptions. So we look at the first paragraph. He tries to give general background to that by citing examples of disruptions, such as the Russia-Ukraine war, the COVID-19, and all that. So he continues from the second paragraph and gives further examples even to that. And here he even gives statistics of some of these issues that he speaks about. Now, the third paragraph, he talks about, despite the increased losses and costs associated with such disruptive events, firms with stronger operational resilience tend to benefit. So now he's drawing from the general issues of disruption into his work. He's now bringing in his work. So from the general perspective, he's now linking that to his issue of operational resilience, talking about why operational resilience is so much important in this disruption. So you see the connection. So he continues from there, and then he builds the reason why operational resilience is important. Let me take the last part of that paragraph. Although the pandemic is unique in many ways, there are remarkable limitations in previous research that raise burning questions about whether and how resource lack constitutes a fundamental feature of resilient operations and supply chains. So he links whatever he's trying to do to the general issues that he has spoken about. And then based on the general issues he has spoken, based on that, he now tries to link that to what has been done in literature, and tries to give the reason why this work is actually important. So the next paragraph tries to dig into what literature has said. First, empirical research on the resilience implication of resource lack is scarce, and available empirical findings remain inconsistent and equivocal. So here he's trying to build a gap. So after giving the general background and linking the background to his work, he's now still hooking them by talking about the issues of the empirical, the research within that space. So this paragraph generally talks about those. So he talks about, first, there is less empirical research within this field, and also they are inconsistent. While some talk about positive relationships, others, while some studies find a positive relationship between slack and firm performance, others find a negative, and he gives examples of all those findings. So it comes to the third, there is a contention that whilst resource lack is an essential feature of resilience, what is more important is the extent of its deployment. Accordingly, it can be argued that there may be significant heterogeneity in firms' capability to deploy resource lack. So he realized that he's still building his research problem. But what I want us to look at is to pay attention to is how you transition the general issues and how he blinked in, well, he came in with his linking that general problems, disruptive issues with his work. And then based on that, how he further transitions from those that link connection into discussing specific gaps that his research addresses, that their research addresses. Now, meanwhile, the theoretical empirical analysis of specific resource slack deployment mechanisms, which are critical for resolving conflicting findings, have been overlooked in prior research. So this is still the issues he raises within literature. These limitations may have undermined knowledge about the operations and supply chain specific resilience implications of resource slack. So he continues to talk about his work, the gaps. Mayer's seminal work on organizational responses to environmental jolts suggests the attention to issues. So he's still building the issue of, so now, apart from the gaps that he has raised, he's now trying to talk about how the importance of looking at certain aspects of resource slack. He's still trying to tell us why it is important to look at these issues of resource slack. He brings up in the attention-based view. Remember in his topic, he talks about, let me quickly go there and come back. The topic looks at linking resource slack to operational resilience. All right. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you, but you break a bit.
All right. Okay. Thank you. So you realize that he continues to build talk about the importance of the ABV perspective in interpreting, in understanding the issues, the issues he tries to bring. And then, so we can consider all these parts as he still trying to bring up the issues of the gap and then the problems. Now he then talks about the research questions. Accordingly, so based on these issues that he has raised, accordingly, the study seeks to address 3 related research questions and then continues to build on the questions. And right after that, so we address the first baseline question by drawing insights from the resource-based view to conceptualize resource slack as a valuable first. So right after the questions, he tries to also add a bit about the contribution of the paper. Now, one thing I realized about this writing style is that because of the perspectives he was bringing, as part of the research gaps, he actually expatiated a lot on the contribution of the paper at that point. That is why he brings in the issues of the resource-based, ABV, and then all those things. So at the point of, after the questions, you realize that he just went straight and pointed out the specific contributions that he's trying to make by using the resource-based view theory and the ABV. And then he concluded by giving the scope of his work, the remaining aspects of the work. So this is actually one style. And this is because of the way he wrote it, the things he was looking at. So there's one of them. So let's just read through the last part, organization, and then so that we can get an idea as to how it is done. So the remainder of this article is structured as follows. We elaborate on the existing scholarly discussions on resource slack and resilience, followed by a formal theorization of the relationship in the 3 research questions. Subsequently, we present the research design and data that were used to empirically examine the research questions. The empirical findings are then discussed by focusing on how they help advance existing resilience literature and practice. So this ends the introduction. There's another paper I want us to quickly go through. Then the remaining part of the work is not, we already know them already. So I wouldn't spend a lot of time there. Let me see if I can get, I think that is Ben. Okay. Let's see how they also wrote their introduction. Okay. So social network relationship, supply chain resilience, and customer-oriented performance of small and medium enterprises in developing economy by Prof. Douglas Samuel, Ben, and Elizabeth Sean. All right. So we just want to look at what they did. So they also started by talking about the general issue, the growing complexity and the inherent risk of unexpected disruptions that characterize business activities make contemporary supply chains vulnerable. So the topic has to do with social network relationship, supply chain resilience. So we understand why they are talking about the risk and then the inherent contemporary supply chain vulnerabilities. So that is how they start. So after the general discussions about the disruptions and the need for resilience, they go to the next part to talk about the role of social network relationships in developing the resilience. So sometimes what I've also realized is that you try to introduce the issues you are trying to talk about in the introduction. I presented a paper for a conference one time, and then one of the comments that came was that I didn't discuss all my the constructs in my study were not found in the introduction. That is because I felt that, okay, these are just conditional issues. My main focus are on supply chain finance, financial performance, and then maybe operational resilience, and not the other aspects. But that is what they said, and I agree with them. So sometimes you find a way of bringing in there, especially if it really fits into the story very well. If not, you can add some other some constructs, especially the conditional ones, if they are not very key at the gaps part. So here they talk about the role of social network relationships in developing resilience to supply chain disruptions. They talk about that part. Now, thus, many firms actively seek strategic collaborations with other firms with social network relationships, helping firms to achieve this. So, okay, so there's this part, I don't know if you can see it. I was trying to identify where they start to build the gaps. So research into supply chain resilience and among SMEs is, however, very limited, with the majority of the studies being conceptual or theoretical in nature. There is the need for good empirically based studies that explore the drivers and effects of supply chain resilience among SMEs. The study proposes social network relationships as the antecedent of supply chain resilience, which in turn leads to higher customer-oriented performance. So here they build that gaps we are talking about. And then they move on to talk about the research questions. The study addresses some research gaps. Okay, all those supply chain resilience, so they build on that perspective further by going into the literature to talk about the specific gaps. And based on that, they then ask the research questions. So we see the research questions here. Does this study exploring the antecedents and effects of supply chain resilience among SMEs enhances supply chain management literature, particularly in the context of developing economies? Our first and second research questions are the social networks, so they talk about all that. So now the next paragraph talks about, I think they should talk about in addressing these questions, our study makes both theoretical and managerial contributions. So this talks about the contribution and how these variables all flow in terms of filling the gaps and then making the work new. So in the following parts, we realize that, yes, in the following parts, sections we present to, the scope is also presented at the latter part. So you realize that you pick a lot of papers, the general style of the introduction. And if you're able to write it very well, it will help us get into very good, good journals. Now, after the introduction, the next aspect, sometimes some papers, you will not see anything like literature and theoretical background. Like here in Professor Samuel's paper, they try to build the literature. where they talk about what supply chain resilience and is, and then social network relationship, the key constructs in there, they talk about them and also talk about the theory. Yes, they talk about the theories here in the literature section before they move to the hypothesis formulation. In Dominic's paper, what they do is to lump together the theoretical and then the hypothesis development. So here they could have also done a similar thing where they will talk about the various constructs and then the theories, and then after that, they then talk about develop the hypothesis. Please, are we clear with that? So here you may find some studies, some papers that do not really have a labeled portion like literature review or literature and theoretical background. Some papers will just put them together, theoretical constructs and then hypothesis development, like Dominic's paper did. Please, are you with me?
Yeah. Can I ask you a question? I think
yes, please.
Can it also be influenced by like maybe the general guidelines? Because I can see Dominic's paper and that of Professor Samuel's paper, they are not from the same journal. One is from so could it also be influenced by the kind of journal that you're publishing in?
Okay, so I've seen papers from the International Journal of Production Economics that also have a similar format like this Ben's paper, Professor Samuel's paper.
Okay.
I've seen papers from that journal that also actually I when I was putting together my paper, one of my papers, I used this format that is now Dominic's format. And Dale wasn't very convinced, like wasn't happy. He was like, these things, take them out. You don't have to talk about them here. So they are a bit divided. And I remember there was one time Goke spoke about the fact that, you see, in the literature review here, all that they are trying to talk about is to try to define supply chain resilience and how they are important within and their relation with within SMEs. You look at here, all they are trying to talk about is social network, these relationships. So Goke was like, right from at the introduction, you can decide that when you are writing them, as social network relationships comes up, you define it at that point. So so supply chain resilience, when it comes up, you define what it is. Your operational definition for supply chain resilience. When social network relationship comes in, you define it at that point and then continue with whatever discussions you're having. So when that happens, when you do that, when you come to after the introduction, you are just going straight to the hypothesis development. You're going to make a case for your hypothesis. But there are some, like we've seen here, they have about, on supply chain resilience, they have about 3 or 4 paragraphs on just that. And then social network, 1, 2, 2 paragraphs. Customer-oriented performance, 1 paragraph. Social capital theory, 1, 2, 3, about 3 paragraphs before they go into the resource-based view, the theories that they are looking at. Yes, so social capital theory, and then they talk about the resource-based view. So for me, I would say that it depends on what you write in there, and how you structure it will depend on you. Especially now that we are all beginning, sometimes it's good to go with this route so that at least you're able to master some of these things. And with time, you're able to master how to really put them into the main introduction. So that at least, especially when they want fewer, the journal is asking for fewer words, fewer words, the length should be lower. So you may not have time to do all these things. But for now, we can structure it in this format, just like this one. It is not very different from what Dominic also did. That's that Dominic didn't label it as literature review. So we can have that part. But the most important aspect of this part is the hypothesis development. And that's also one other aspect that we must also look at. Most of these students, when they are arguing their hypothesis formulation, they mostly they do something like literature review. Appiah et al. 2020 found that social network relationship influences supply chain resilience in the manner that so and so and so. Bona also found that this and that happened, and this also found that this, and for that matter, we hypothesize that social network relationship will influence supply chain resilience. That is not hypothesis development. When we see those ones, we must be careful about those things. So in hypothesis development, you become like a lawyer. You are trying to argue how one relationship, like how one construct influences the other. So you are trying to make a case for it. So you are, it's more like, let me bring up the issue of supply chain financing and operational resilience. So in making this argument, we talk about the fact that supply chain financing all across literature have been argued as a risk mitigating tool. And according to Zhang et al., they talk about the fact that supply chain finance helps firms to be able to improve their businesses, improve their operations by the fact that other partners are able to give them extended credit. They are able to get improved working capital. And based on this capital, these firms are able to do better. So we are arguing not because somebody has found if somebody has already found that relationship, then you are shooting yourself in the foot because your work has no relevance. Or somebody has already found that relationship, discussed, and then found what is already there. So there's no need for your work. But in arguing here, we are talking about how that particular relationship, the independent variable actually influences the dependent variable in that relationship. So with supply chain financing and operational resilience, I'm talking about how, supply chain financing being a risk mitigating tool, and how does that happen? By firms giving them, their supply chain partners giving them lower credit. And if they have lower credit, it means that they will have a lot more space to money in terms of working capital to be able to do other things, to be able to, and if you can even argue the issue of even slack, because you are using supply chain financing, your working capital will be efficient and effective, and you may be able to have slack. And based on that slack, you use that slack to build operational resilience. So in arguing this way, you're able to see that, yes, you are really making a case for that relationship and not just talking about how somebody has found and then things like that. So that is with the, yes, please.
Good. So, for instance, you have introduced a variable, and that is your contribution. Okay. And as far as literature is concerned, that relationship has not been explored. Can you use the already existing to infer, and based on that, you formulate your hypothesis? Let me put this. Human capital all across literature is seen to impact positively to firm performance in all the indicators. Okay. And studies in this line has looked at health facilities, airport operations, and others, but it has not looked at food loss. But because the relationship has been positive in that line, can you base on that and argue or hypothesize that this can also lead to expected performance?
Okay, so right from the very beginning, with your the building of your model and you coming out with those constructs and the proposed the relationships, you should be able to tell us why human capital will lead to reduced food loss. So sure. Your argument, yes, it is, nobody has done that work. So you are not going to talk about A has found that human capital reduces food loss. No. But you are rather going to talk about how you think human capital can reduce food loss. And one way of making this argument, I've not brought in the issue of theory, is the theory. Okay. In hypothesis development, it is mainly theory that is really working. That is where you really see the work of your theory at play. So for instance, Mr. Entry says the human capital and food loss. Mr. Entry, what theory can we use? The human capital theory.
The human capital theory, yes.
Okay. The human capital theory, what does it say?
Okay, so the human capital theory saying that basically, with respect to developing the employees, firm-specific employees in that sector, now they would understand I'm focusing on temperature sensitive foods.
Okay.
So temperature variation causes food loss.
Okay.
And therefore, when firm employees are developed in terms of knowledge, skills, and as a result, they have had experience in that field, they will be able to monitor the temperature, regulate the systems to ensure that the predetermined temperature of the product is at par and consistent. Due to that, the food loss in that respect will be reduced.
So you see, what you've just done is to argue out the relationship. So with what you just said, just that is a summarized form of like the general what you would have written. But this is how like you argue out your relationship. So from the human capital theory, it talks about the importance of human capital. You building the capacity of the people who work in the firm. And so because these are sensitive products, if employees are well endowed in the how sensitive these products are and at what level should the code system be put to be able to keep them means that because this knowledge is it's at work and they are well well trained in all these areas, there is likely going to be a reduction in food losses because hitherto if they didn't know that maybe if the refrigerator is off for maybe more than 10 minutes, the products in there will start going spoiling. Now they know. So the moment it's around, they have to even the standby generator has to kick in. They have to make sure that it is within the 10 minutes so that it doesn't start spoiling. So by so doing, food loss is going to reduce. So this is an argument you've been able to make for that particular relationship. And you did that by using the theory.
Sure. Okay.
So what is not what is I think is not right is to talk about so and so has did this work. They looked at the relationship between human capital and food loss, and they found that you've already said that nobody has done that. So that is your contribution. So there's no way you're going to
Okay.
find a paper in that area.
Sure.
Please, are we all okay? Do we get Mr. Entry's example has really made certain things clearer? Please, can I continue?
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm
please,
sure.
you can.
All right. So you use the theory to actually argue out the relationships, and this is where you are actually see the theory working. So there are some papers I have seen that normally would not talk about the theory, but you see the theory working in the hypothesis development. So you not see like in Ben's paper where they talk about the social network theory, social capital theory, and then the resource based view of Dominic's paper. But in the hypothesis development, you see the theory, you mention the theory, and you see the way they use the theory in making the arguments. Especially if the journal expects very less words. So we after the hypothesis development, the next section is the methodology. So I would like to switch to Dominic's paper so that we do that. Okay. So let's look at it. Dominic, for the section 2, talks about theoretical background and hypothesis development. And they try to define the various construct, operational resilience, resource slack, and then all that. But one thing is that sometimes if the constructs we are looking at are not constructs that are generally known within the literature, it's important to spend some time talking about it. So after that, they then build the hypothesis. The resource lack is positively related to operational resilience. They move to the next organizational attention. All right. Okay, so with the methodology, in Dominic's paper, they start talking about the measures. Some will say measures or measures development. So here, you are trying to look at where we adapted those measures. From the few papers I have, student thesis I have seen, some of them will do well in getting the measures. Some of them do just write anything. So it's important that we are able to at least check those sources that they state to make sure that they're actually items that are coming from them. One other thing I've also observed about measures development is that sometimes, for instance, we are dealing with we are doing some work currently, and the constructs are quite new, and so you go into literature, you don't really see, and these are constructs that we're actually bringing from the health sector. So even if those things they've used them, you don't actually see the measures, the items that were used. So we had to come out with our own measures. Now, in coming out with our own measures, whatever issues that, like questions that we asked, or whatever statements that measures that we brought up, were things that were coming from literature. Were things that were actually coming from literature. So when you read the literature on that particular construct, this is how it defines it. So we have a number of definitions, and based on those definitions, we're able to understand the construct itself. And then based on that, we ask questions that can help us measure it. Now, if we do now with this thing that we have done, we cannot say that we took the items from A or Mr. B. You may have to talk about adapted or based on 2 or 3 papers. It cannot be just one. Based on 2 or 3 papers, because you have to take the various views of these papers into consideration. Now, after doing that, when you read this Dominic's paper, the development, it gets to a point where it talks about giving the questions, those items to experts, researchers, or people who have worked within the field to see whether they actually meet the content validity. So in such a case, we are talking about content validity. So I have sat down, looked at the construct based on literature. I've come out with my questions. Now the next point is to maybe send those questions to somebody who's who researches within that field. Maybe this is about health issues, so I take it to the health, maybe a professor within the health sector to see, give me his views on them. Maybe I talk to somebody who actually works within that field to tell me what he thinks. Do they really represent what they do there? And he says yes. So I'm trying to establish content validity or face validity. Then, so these things must be discussed, especially when these questions, this is the way you got the measures. But if there were questions that were already there and you are just adapting, you just talk about the fact that you adapted from so and so, adapted from so and so, adapted from so and so, and you are good to go. But the moment you have to, they were not established questions already, and yes, based on literature, but you have to bring them up. There is not a full validation paper. It will only be a full validation paper, so you cannot go the full scale of validation. But when you talk about the fact that you spoke to experts within the field and they gave you comments for you to reframe or rephrase the questions and all that, I think every paper journal should be okay. You should accept that. So these are key aspects of the methodology. So the measures are very, very important. Now, after the measures, we talk about the control variables. So here he talks about some substantive constructs. That's the main constructs under consideration. And then we have the control variables. Now, most of these students probably would not have put in a lot of control variables. So let us, as we are writing, let's screen through the data to see what constructs did they take data on? What other variables did they take data on, and see whether those variables can be captured as control variables. The truth is that these days, to be able to publish in a top journal, sometimes the control variables you use are very, very important to them, because they feel that there are certain things that your analysis may not bring out because you are not controlling for a lot of variables. So it's important to capture the control variables, either the directly measured one or the the perception-based one. Important to talk about them. All right. So from there, we talk about the sample and data collection. So here, who are the people? Here we talk about the context, why the context is important. We talk about if there are SMEs in Ghana, how did we come about them? How did we choose them? Most of business and management research normally would use convenience and purposive sampling. And one of the issues that came up, one of these, the Vivers before the Christmas break was, there was this question about why would you use a non-probability sampling for a quantitative research. So we have to keep those things in mind as we write to be able to, so that we are able to argue why it's important to, why we have to use purposive sampling. The truth is that within our side of the part of the world, we don't really have data on these firms. So to be able to get a sampling frame and to, based on the sampling frame, decide to do a simple random sampling or stratified or whatever kind of sampling may not be operational, may not work in our context. So we need to make all those arguments at the sampling and data collection part. So we talk about the data collection, then issues like that. Now, as part of the data collection, we also talk about the missing value, the data quality assurance that went on in making sure that the questionnaire was okay. The Likert scale that was used, maybe if it's a 5-pointed Likert, a 5-point Likert scale or a 7-pointed Likert scale. We talk about all of them, and maybe you can talk a little about the descriptives. We realize that as part of the sample and data collection, they talk about the descriptives here. Now, this particular style, one of our papers, there was this paper, we did it this way, and the reviewer was like, no, we needed to bring it to the section 4, which was talking about the data analysis. But probably that was his view. But some people think that it is part of the data. We are just describing the data. It's not part of the actual work. So it should be at the methodology section. But either way, it's okay. So under this same methodology here, we talk about the common method bias. And I know that most of these student theses may not have, probably wouldn't have done common method bias analysis. Even if they do, they may be using the Hammond's one-factor one, which most papers wouldn't really regard as a very robust measure of common method bias. So those ones, Doc was talking about the fact that maybe some of them may have to go and take data again. If we have to take data, or okay, if we already have the data, we can still bring in the common method bias section, and then we can run them, run those aspects and add if the data is there. I think that will help, so that at least it makes the paper a bit better.
Okay, Ike.
Yeah.
Hello. I think another issue has to do with the common method bias, and some now using both approaches.
Okay.
So what do you talk about that?
Yes. I think in this paper, for instance, he talks about both approaches. Okay. You see here, because this is a paper, you don't bring all those analyses and all. He mentions them here. Well, he talks about the fact that the paper, let me see if, so he talks about why common method bias is important. So in dealing with common method bias, when you are discussing it, you talk about the procedural measures you put in place to ensure that at least bias is reduced. And further, you talk about the one factor, Hammond's one-factor method, where you talk about it shouldn't be the first one item shouldn't explain up to 50% of
50%
variance.
and then the second cut and cutlass will.
Yes. So the second one is where you then compare the various you run two additional models to your first model analysis, where you then compare them to ensure to see whether they are different from your original model fit analysis. So you can talk, it's more of narration. So when you talk about them, it makes the work a bit more stronger and then deeper.
So in that sense, like you rightly said, most of these MSc students, they would not even do common method bias assessment. So what then do we do? Are we supposed to bring in such?
Come again.
I'm saying that assuming the people that we picked, the
Okay.
student did not consider assessing the common method bias and its effect. And then we need it to justify our work. So in this regard, what do we do?
Yes, so I think the data that we have, the data there. The data is already there. They took the data. Mr. Anand, I hope that's right. Caleb.
Yeah, we have all the data available, but as in
Okay.
whether the data they actually collected the actual data, because of some of these students, the way they like to cook data and the others. That is my only fear about all these things.
Yeah.
That is my only fear. You do all
That's
the work
true.
and it gets to the actual analysis, you go and run and realize that there's a lot of issues with the data because it was not actually collected. They just tweaked things because they know they just need a certificate.
Yeah. So that is the concern. So maybe let's get there and then see how we can cross. So for the students, I doubt if you can have even up to 5% of them running common method bias. I doubt. So but to make our work better, especially
Well,
I realize that
some of them will run, but hey, they just copied it from somebody's work and just
yeah, that is true. Yeah, some more. Okay, let's see when we get there, we'll cross. Okay.
All right, okay. Thank you.
All right. So from there, here they in the analysis, we zoom straight into the analysis where so the initial part talks about the measurement model. So you realize that here in talking about the measurement model, they actually discussed it under the methodology. But the methodology could have just ended at the sampling and all that. And then the next section, and the descriptives, and the next section will be the hypothesis, then the data analysis and discussion proper, where you start with the measurement model analysis. You do your EFA and all those things. Then after that, the next section deals with subsection deals with the structural model analysis. But here he decided to do them separately. So in ours, after this, I'll suggest the general format we can use so that all our papers are within that lesson. Actually, the papers, the journals do not, I've seen different journals, even within the production economics that separates the lesson as the measurement model to the section 4. And then, so the most important thing is the key items being there. All right. So EFA becomes important. Yes, if we can do EFA and the EFA is good, it will support our work. But sometimes if the EFA is going to give you problems, EFA in the work we are doing, we may not necessarily need EFA. But if it is good, it helps to authenticate the work, give the work some kind of robustness. But if it's not there, you can go straight to the CFA and then we do that. Then we present the structural model analysis where we are talking about the relationships under concern, how they actually relate, whether we are testing our hypothesis. I don't know the kind of analysis the tools they used, but if it is smart PLS, yes, smart PLS may not have this model fit. The smart PLS may not even be concerned so much about common method bias because those papers, you don't really, Hammond's one factor is enough to talk about common method bias because you may not be able to do that kind of core method bias, the analysis within Smart PLS. But if it is, there are papers that have used TFI and then NNFI and those things, Amos and then Israel or M+, then everybody looking at that will expect to see the core method bias issues that we have raised. Now, if there is the opportunity to do a robustness check, fine, but robustness check is not a very, very important aspect of the work, but just that it also gives it, doing it gives the paper a bit of credibility and robustness, but it's not something that we may have to do that. And then you present the summary of the results. If there's moderation, it's important for moderation. It's important to bring a graph. If there is, then from there we go to the discussion. With the discussion, this is how the discussion is done. The discussion is done in line with the contributions. We hear it's not as if you are discussing the results outside the making general meanings. The meanings you are making should be linked to the results and then the implications, what it means for managers, what it means for literature and all that. So here too, you also use the theory in discussing the work. Theory is also important here. So the theory, you use the theory in discussing, in making your argument at the hypothesis part. So if you've tested it and you are discussing it, you should also discuss it within the theory. Now, you realize that in the chapter, in section 4, where the results has been showcased, when you are talking about the results, you don't make any inferences in the results. You just talk about, okay, supply chain finance had a positive and a significant relationship with financial performance. And you may put into bracket the beta values and the T values or the P values. And then, however, for that matter, hypothesis 1 is accepted. Further, however, operational resilience didn't show any mediating role in the relationship between supply chain finance and financial performance. So you are just discussing the results. You are not making any further discussions. But in the chapter 5, where you are having your discussions, you discuss them in light of the theory, in light of the implications and your general contributions. So here, that is what was done. Yes. So you read it, you realize that there will be theory. So let me see something here. Yeah, theoretical implications and contributions. So the first part deals with the theoretical contributions, which generally is you are building on the contributions that you discussed in the chapter 1, in the introduction, sorry. So mostly this is what you take to the introduction section. So here you discuss them in a bit more detail, where you compare the work also with existing work and see how different this work is with them and how your work adds to knowledge within that field. Then we have the managerial implications. So the implications, you're actually talking about the how your work, how managers should see your work and what advice your work actually gives to the managers. And then, yes, so it goes, okay. After this, there should be limitations and future research. So here we discuss the general limitations of the work and how future research should improve upon it. I think we should be done. Please, do you have any questions on what we've discussed so far?
But it's an interesting journey to go. It's truly an interesting journey to go.
Well, we'll get there. So generally, this is what I'm thinking the structure should be. We should have the introduction, like we've discussed. Let's also have the literature aspect, especially so the literature. What we should be looking out for is whether the constructs are things that are are already known within the literature. If they're already known in the literature, we may not have to go over them and then explain, talk about them again. But if there are constructs in there that are not very general within the literature, we should have a literature section which talks about those variables. But if we have constructs that are generally known, we can bring their definitions in the introduction aspect, in the introduction part. So that's the caveat for that part. Then we can move on in that section 2. We can also, or we can move from there to section 3, where we talk about we discuss the hypothesis. In the literature review, we can also bring the section, we can also bring the theories, talk a little bit about the theories. The chapter 3, we talk about the hypothesis development, we develop the hypothesis. The section 4, we go to the methodology. And then the section 5, we have our results and analysis. Then section 6, we have our discussions, discussions, and then the limitations, and then all those things there. So at least in a paper that is that has constructs that are generally known, we can have 5 sections. And a paper that has papers that are a bit not known, we can have 6 sections. Or we can decide to collapse the section 2 and section 3 into 1. Okay, so we can decide to collapse the section 2 and section 3 together, where an aspect of section 2 will be dealing with the literature issues, and then the second part will deal with the hypothesis development, so that we can have 5 in all. So this is my suggestion. If anybody has something to add, we can add up, and then maybe we can bring the meeting to an end. Okay, Mr. Caleb.
I think it's generally good.
Yes, sir, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, somebody said something.
No, I said it's okay at my end.
Okay. So, Mr. Caleb, over to you.
Well, okay. So I think you have done a good job, and if you don't mind, I think you can share the various papers that you use for the presentation on the platform, like you share the other material.
That's fine.
And I think once I've recorded the video, I'll put the video on YouTube and send the link back to us, so that those who want to go back and watch the whole thing can watch it. And we also play that you also be on standby wherever we get locked up. I think we'll have to come back to your doors to find more clarification on certain things. So
That's
for
fine.
me, I think you've done a very good job. You've really done a good job. And like I keep saying, research is not for the light-hearted people. I mean, you need balls to stand in the gap. Anyway, so we'll do our best. We'll do our best.
Okay.
Like I said earlier, my only fear is that I mean, some of these validity tests and all those tests that we need to run, if we don't take care, it might lock most of the work in the middle, because of how students will always want to cook the data. Because recently, those who are even doing their MSc and the MPhil, can you imagine
Okay.
that somebody is doing something on, let's say, procurement practices, or probably something on in the harbor and the others, and the person will post the questionnaire on the group that students should help him fill the questionnaire. I
Wow.
mean, at the end of the day, all they need is just the data. People
Yeah.
should just fill something for them. So at the end of the day, you don't get the actual issue
Yeah.
on the ground, because they
Yeah.
just need a certificate to go. So I'm only
That's true.
praying that whilst we try to put things together and begin to run the data up and down, maybe some of them, if the work becomes so robust and so good, probably we ourselves have to step into the field and go and get the data ourselves, because their data might be useless. So
That's true.
let's pray and hope that at least we will
That,
find
that,
a way
that's
out.
very true. Because it's sometimes we ask ourselves the length and the platform sent to, whether the respondents are capable to. So, but let's see if that is the okay to go. Then I'm sure we can use our good offices to go to the field and then take the data again.
Yeah, maybe that is what some of them will have to do. Because looking at the way they collect the data, most of them they just put it on their class WhatsApp group. Charlie, please help me. Church WhatsApp group, please help me. Fail. So if you want managers to give their candid opinion about a certain situation, you end up getting people, taxi drivers, masons, and others all giving their view about a phenomenon that they have no idea. So I agree, strongly agree, strongly disagree. They just take anything and go their way. So God give us strength and grace.
Oh,
So
yeah.
thank you very
Yeah.
much, Senior Ike. I think
Welcome, boss.
you've really done a great job, honestly. Congratulations to you and thank you very much.
Thank you.
So
You're welcome.
we will go back and put things together and whatever the situation is, we will come back to your doorstep for more
All
clarification
right.
on that.
All right. That's
I don't know
no
if
problem.
anybody has any other thing to add.
I know I'm okay.
I'm also okay.
Okay, all right. So if all the members on the platform says they are okay, then I think this is where we draw the curtain. But like I said, Senior Ike, we plead that
Yeah.
you always open your door so that whenever we knock, we will find you inside.
Yeah. I will.
All
Don't
right.
worry.
Okay. So don't also forget to share these two papers with us. It's very
I'll do that.
okay.
I'll do
All
that.
right. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone, and thank for your
Yeah, thank
time and
you.
have a good evening.
All right. You too.
Same to you. Right.